Mike verbally abuses me on a daily basis. However, my father-in-law is a nice person and we share common interests. I always looked forward to chatting with him. 10 years after getting married, my father-in-law suddenly passes away. Mike is in the middle of a cheating trip. I called and messaged Mike. But despite waiting for a response, I received none, and the day of the funeral arrived. While I was busy preparing for the funeral, Mike finally called. "I told you so many times. Why are you calling me?" "Well, you see your father? Who cares about the old man?" He interrupted my words and yelled at me. "Thanks to you, the good mood is ruined." His final words made me smirk. "That's right, it's not work. You're on a hot springs trip with your mistress. Anyway, I'm working. Don't ever contact me again, UB." I heard a snap, like something breaking. "All right, I'll keep quiet about the funeral and the will. Whatever happens later, I don't care." "Okay." After hanging up the phone, a smirk appeared on my face. "Who's the jerk now?" "You'll regret his careless words later." I'm Dorothy, a 47-year-old housewife. I met Mike at a friend's drinking party, and we've been married for 10 years. I was invited by a friend and, feeling out of place, I just wanted to go home when Mike started talking to me. We had a brief chat that day and left, but later he contacted me again, and we started dating with marriage in mind. Mike's cheerful and talkative nature drew me in more and more. After that, we got married. I lost my parents to illness in my late teens and was raised with my uncle's help. Mike's mother passed away a few years ago, and now it's just his father. The thought of not having to deal with mother-in-law issues was a relief. We decided from the start not to have children so we could focus on our careers. Even so, I believed that life with the cheerful Mike would be enjoyable. But those expectations were soon shattered. Shortly after we got married, Mike's attitude towards me drastically changed. He started bragging about his prestigious university degree and belittling me for being a high school graduate. The triggers were always trivial things, like him being in a bad mood, tired, or disliking my responses. "You're such a boring woman. If I hadn't married you, you'd have been an old maid." It's incredibly outdated to say someone would become an old maid, but Mike would half smile and say it to me. "You'd have ended up a lonely, miserable old hag." Is that so? So you should be grateful to me, serve me better. Not knowing what would trigger Mike's bad mood, I was always on edge. Even though he wasn't physically violent, his loud voice and rough language made me shrink, owing to my timid nature. Every year on our birthdays and Christmas, we always went out to eat as a couple. Hearing this, one might find our relationship heartwarming, but it was different for us. It was more like a forced event. I would choose a fancy restaurant online and make reservations. Mike would smile and enjoy the meal in a pleasant atmosphere, but almost always he would criticize me afterward. "Wasn't there a better place? That cheap Italian food doesn't suit my taste at all." He would shout, spitting, and I would slump my shoulders. The online reviews were good, and the atmosphere and food were great. I wanted to say this, but I knew Mike would get furious if I contradicted him. Basically, he just wanted to win the argument, so apologizing made it end faster. "I'm sorry." With my apology, Mike would flare his nostrils and arrogantly declare, "If you mess up like this again, we're getting divorced, remember that." On the other hand, for my birthday, he would take me to a restaurant he chose, ignoring my preferences. Even though I can't handle spicy food. He would book a Thai restaurant, and if my reaction wasn't as he expected, he'd criticize me. People with only a high school diploma can't appreciate taste. "I spent a lot of money on this meal, and it was wasted on you." Given this, it's no surprise that our daily life was filled with complaints as well. "My mom's cooking was much tastier and richer. Why is your cooking so bad?" I couldn't help but murmur to Mike, who was raising his voice. "Before we got married, you said my cooking was delicious." "That was just me being polite," Mike replied with a sarcastic smile. "I hoped you'd improve over time, but I'm disappointed. A woman without cooking lessons from her mom." As I hung my head, Mike's taunts grew harsher. "You're bad at cleaning, your cooking is terrible, and you have zero charm as a woman. How did you manage to live for over 30 years like this? If it were me, I'd be too embarrassed and end my life." Tearing up, I finally retorted, "Stop it. How can you say such horrible things? Didn't you marry me because you loved me? I just wanted someone to do the housework. Plus, being married makes it easier to relate to business partners." Mike's calm response filled me with immense disappointment. From shortly after our marriage, the thought of divorce started to cross my mind, but I hesitated. I felt guilty towards my uncle and his wife, who raised me, and there was also my father-in-law in my mind. During our dating period, Mike once told me about his childhood. My mother-in-law was a stay-at-home mom. My father-in-law, who had retired, worked for a global company and often had overseas assignments and business trips. Mike, who was doted on by his mother, would be sternly reprimanded for his sloppy behavior whenever his father came home. Perhaps because of this, whenever we visited his parents, Mike would act kindly towards me in front of his father. He probably still can't stand up to his father. But during a visit home for summer break, his true nature was finally exposed. While we were out, my father-in-law returned to retrieve something he had forgotten, and Mike, unaware, began his usual tirade against me. "What was that tone earlier? It made it sound like I make you do all the housework." The moment his father left, Mike reverted to his rough manner. "But it's true, isn't it? The only thing you help with is taking out the trash." "I work full-time too, so I wish you'd help more with the cleaning." "Huh, taking out the trash is a housewife's job. You should be grateful I even help with that." His thunderous voice made me shrink back. "Even if you work full-time, your job is replaceable. Unlike me, who carries the future of the company, don't defy me when you earn less." At that moment, my father-in-law peeked in. Mike's face froze. "Dad, I thought you had left." "I came back to get my rewards card. What was that just now?" Mike's eyes darted around. "Mike, do you always talk to Dorothy like that?" No, it's not like that." "Dorothy, is that true?" I nodded silently, and my father-in-law let out a deep sigh, shaking his head tiredly. "Acting all high and mighty. Who do you think you are, Dorothy? I'm sorry I didn't notice." "Oh no." Breaking the awkward silence, my father-in-law smiled wryly and scratched his head. "I can't really talk, as I left the child rearing to my wife. If I'd known it would turn out like this, I should have taken my wife and Mike to live with me in England." At those words, I looked up. "You were stationed in England. I wanted to live in England when I was a kid. I admired Sherlock Holmes." My father-in-law's eyes lit up too. "Do you like detective novels, Dorothy? We have that in common." My father-in-law took off his jacket, sat on the couch, and started talking about his favorite novels. I sat across from him at the table, smiling and nodding along. Mike, deflated by our camaraderie, looked displeased and wandered off somewhere. After that, my father-in-law and I began chatting through video calls and messages. We discussed our thoughts on novels and recommended new releases to each other, deepening our connection through our shared hobby. During holidays, we would lose track of time talking about books. However, Mike seemed annoyed by the growing closeness between his wife and father. His verbal abuse towards me worsened. Sucking up to my dad, how pathetic. He even started bad-mouthing his own father. If the old man gets along with an idiot like you, his education must not be all that impressive. Please stop saying bad things about your father. I protested timidly, but Mike just sneered. Paying to talk to a hostess would be a more worthwhile way to spend my time than talking to you. Of course, I had no inappropriate thoughts about my father-in-law. I saw my father-in-law as a father figure, having lost my own father at a young age. My father-in-law also wanted a daughter and genuinely enjoyed our conversations, sharing the same hobbies. But the rift between Mike and me grew deeper, feeling a sense of urgency. I tried to bond with Mike by learning about soccer, his favorite sport, and talking to him while he watched matches or asking about his work. Mike had suddenly started working late, going on business trips and working weekends a few years ago, and I was worried about his health. "Aren't you too busy lately? Are you okay?" He brushed me off with an annoyed look. "Shut up. I'm in demand, so I have to go on all these trips." Mike, who had stopped making eye contact with me, started carrying his phone everywhere except to the bathroom. His grinning at the screen was very suspicious. But knowing he'd get angry if I pried, I pretended not to notice. One night, while Mike was in the shower, his phone lit up on the couch. I was tidying the living room and glanced over, gasping. The message on the screen caught my eye. "Mike, I'm looking forward to the hot springs tomorrow. We'll have to use the family bath because of the kids, but the night view should be great. Once the kids are asleep, let's have lots of fun together." With trembling hands, I picked up the phone and entered the passcode. Mike often mumbled the passcode when he couldn't use fingerprint recognition, so I had memorized it. I tapped on the message from a lady named Sarah and scrolled through the screen. Messages and photos with Sarah, along with photos of what appeared to be their secret child, filled the screen, shocking me deeply. The messages with Sarah went back a long time. Checking the dates, I was stunned. 3 years ago. He's been cheating on me for that long. Hearing the bathroom door close, I quickly sent the evidence to my phone and returned Mike's phone to the couch. I'm so done with this. I won't tolerate it any longer. I'll gather all the evidence and slam the divorce papers on him. Wanting to vent to someone, I arranged to meet Mike's cousin Lisa at a cafe on my day off. Lisa was actually my senior in the high school club. I remember she treated me like a little sister back then. We lost touch after graduation but reconnected at my wedding, celebrating the strange coincidence. I had told her about Mike's abusive behavior before, but revealing the existence of his mistress and child left her utterly astonished. "What a worthless guy." She sighed, looking exasperated, and then apologized to me. "I'm sorry my foolish cousin has caused you so much trouble. Please, don't apologize." I'm embarrassed as his relative. She propped her chin on her hand and stared into the distance. Aunt doted on Mike when he was a child. They were well off thanks to Uncle, and Mike had good looks and brains, so Aunt indulged his every whim. And that turned him into an unbearable adult. Exactly, that personality won't change. You might be better off leaving him. Yeah? I couldn't help but sigh. Oh, I'll miss my father-in-law and you, Lisa. Lisa grabbed my hand and, with a pleading tone, said, "Don't say things like that. We've finally reconnected, so let's hang out. You can still talk to Uncle, right?" Yeah. How would my father-in-law react if I told him I was getting a divorce? Could we still stay in touch even if we weren't family anymore? I smiled at Lisa, but anxiety gnawed at me. When I got home, I found Mike humming and packing stylish jackets and designer bags into a suitcase. "Are you going on another trip? You have a lot of luggage." "Yeah, I'm heading to Vermont for a week." "A week," he responded with a broad smile. "I'm in demand, so I get called everywhere. It's tough being popular." Knowing there was no branch in Vermont, I stayed silent as Mike turned to me and said sternly, "Don't contact me at all until I get back. I'm busy with work during the day and entertaining clients at night." Even so, I'll call if there's an emergency. Mike frowned at my words. Handle it yourself, just don't disturb my fun. I mean, my work. All right, I got it. The day after Mike left in high spirits, I checked my phone during a work break and widened my eyes. There were several missed calls from the local general hospital and a voicemail. Feeling a sense of unease, I immediately called back, and a paramedic answered. Is this Dorothy Wayne's number? Yes. We contacted you based on the patient's call history. Patient? As I listened to the paramedic, I felt the blood drain from my face. My father-in-law had collapsed and been taken to the hospital. Struggling to keep from collapsing myself, I cautiously asked, How is my father-in-law's condition? Paramedic, he's in critical condition. Please come immediately. I hung up and called Mike right away. But the phone just rang and rang with no answer. I left a message after the voicemail picked up, then sent a text. I informed my boss of the situation and rushed to the hospital, where I found Lisa, her parents Robert and Mary, and other relatives gathered around the bed. Seeing my father-in-law connected to numerous tubes and a ventilator shocked me, and tears flowed uncontrollably. We had just spoken on a video call last night, and now this. The neighbor found him collapsed in front of the mailbox and called an ambulance. Mary explained with teary eyes. Where's Mike? Well, he's on a business trip to Vermont. He seems very busy, and I couldn't reach him. Isn't it lunchtime now, honestly, at a time like this? Mary and Robert left the room, clearly frustrated. After a while, they returned looking disheartened. They still couldn't reach him. Despite everyone's prayers, my father-in-law passed away and went to heaven. There was no time to dwell in sorrow, as I was immediately swamped with arrangements, contacting the family church and the funeral home. I'm sorry, I can't get a response from Mike, so I'd like to ask a relative to act as the chief mourner. A few hours later, I called Robert and Mary, and Robert agreed to take on the role. On the night of the wake at the funeral home, Robert, Mary, Lisa, and I sat by my father-in-law, sharing tearful memories throughout the night. The next morning, amidst the hectic funeral preparations, Mike finally called. Hey, I told you not to call me. Why did you call? He yelled furiously from the start. Listen, calm down, your father. I don't care about my dad. Can't you obey your husband? He cut me off, shouting over me as I tried to explain. But there was a reason, your father. I'm on the elite path, unlike you with just a high school diploma. I instinctively pulled the phone away from my ear. His voice was so loud it hurt. I told you not to disturb my work. You ruined a good atmosphere with your calls. His final words made me smirk. That's right, it's not work. You're on a hot springs trip with your mistress. Anyway, I'm working. Don't ever contact me again, UB. I heard a snap, like something breaking inside me. All right, I'll keep quiet about the funeral and the will. Whatever happens later, I don't care. Okay. After hanging up, a smirk spread across my face. Who's the real jerk here? He'll regret his careless words later. And then came the first memorial service. Hey, why isn't anyone home to greet me? The wife should be here to welcome her husband back. His arrogant tone came through the phone, so I told him I was at his parents' house. He came over right away. Looking puzzled, he barged into the house. Why are Lisa and Uncle's cars parked in our driveway? Mike asked me. Then his eyes widened as he saw the relatives in mourning clothes gathered in the room. He must have felt the icy stares directed at him. Frowning, he asked me again, Dorothy, what's going on here, by the way? Where's Dad? Your father is over there. Mike's face twisted even more as I pointed. At the far end of the room, a temporary altar was set up. On the altar covered with white cloth were the cross with his father's name on it, an urn, and the framed photo. There were also a prayer book placed on the altar. Mike walked towards the altar as if drawn to it and stared intently at the photo for a while before bursting into laughter. He laughed loudly, looking around at us. "Come on, this has to be a joke. Is Dad in on it too? This is way too much. Don't you get it, you fool? Who would joke about something like this?" Chastised with serious faces, Mike's smile vanished. He froze and mumbled softly, "No, this can't be true." The moment our eyes met, Mike quickly walked over and grabbed my shoulder roughly. With bloodshot eyes, he started speaking rapidly. "Dorothy, why didn't you tell me sooner? Did you go ahead with the funeral without me? You're just my wife. This is outrageous. I'll sue you." "Stop it." Lisa pulled Mike away from me and scolded him sternly. "When your dad was in critical condition, Dorothy tried to contact you. But you yelled at her not to call because you were busy, right?" Mike's shoulders flinched. "No, that's not true. Dorothy didn't explain it well. Don't lie, we know you ignored our messages too. It was because I had an important meeting." I immediately thrust my phone in front of Mike's face. "It wasn't work. It was a trip with your mistress, wasn't it?" Mike was speechless, staring at the messages I had sent to my phone earlier. When I placed the stack of the investigation report and photos of his affair on the table, murmurs spread among the relatives. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? You must think very little of me." Once I hired a private investigator, the evidence started piling up. Relatives gathered around, picking up the documents and photos, their voices filled with disbelief. An affair with a hostess for 2 years, and he has a secret child. She's 20 years younger. That woman must be after his money. Mike probably spent a fortune on her, didn't he? Mocked by the relatives, Mike defensively retorted, "Don't call it an affair so lightly." "What?" "Sarah was my wife in a past life." The room fell into an awkward silence. The moment we met, I felt a spark. I knew she was my soulmate. Sarah agreed. We just met too late in this life. With flushed cheeks and sparkling eyes, Mike left everyone, including me, in stunned silence. At that moment, Mike undoubtedly earned an unflattering nickname. The idiot nephew who fell for a hostess's sweet talk, cheated, and even had a child. The doorbell rang, breaking the uncomfortable silence. On the intercom screen was, inexplicably, Mike's mistress, Sarah. "What, Sarah? Why?" Mike, peering over my shoulder, looked equally shocked. Lisa then spoke into the intercom. "Please come in." "Okay, excuse me." Sarah replied cheerfully and walked in, only to look confused at the sight of people in mourning clothes. Mike, we're here to talk about the divorce, right? I understand your wife being here, but why are all these relatives here? It feels like a memorial service." "No, I didn't invite you." Seeing their confusion, Lisa spoke up. "Yes, I invited her." Sarah turned around, looking suspicious. "Who are you?" "Sorry, I got your number from a colleague at the OB-GYN clinic. I pretended to be Mike and sent you the message." Lisa handed Sarah a business card and continued explaining. "Our hospital's midwife delivered all of your children, right?" The moment she saw the business card, Sarah's face turned pale. "Oh, the youngest was born at your hospital, wasn't she?" "Yes, I was surprised when my colleague told me it was Sarah's story I was hearing." Mike tilted his head in confusion. "Wait, you said all of them?" "Yes, including Sarah's husband's children." "Hold on, Sarah. You were divorced." Lisa and I couldn't help but chuckle at Mike's distress. "Oh my, you really don't know anything, do you?" "Mike, Sarah is married. Her husband is just away on a solo assignment, right, Sarah?" Seeking her confirmation, Sarah pressed her lips together and said nothing. Mike's face turned pathetic as he muttered in a barely audible voice, "But she said she was single when she was a hostess." If you were in her shoes, would you tell a customer, "I have a husband and 5 kids"? When I laid out the investigation report and family photos in front of Mike, his eyes widened and he shouted, "5 kids? No way." It's true, 4 from university age to 6th grade. Plus Mike's child makes 5. Wait a minute, the ages don't add up. Sarah is 30 years old. I sighed in exasperation at Mike's desperate assertion. Love truly is blind, but missing all this was beyond naive. Sarah is 50. She's the same age as me and you. Well, she must have worked as a hostess to pay off her plastic surgery debts. That's why she doesn't look like her kids. Sarah looked sullen as I reviewed the documents. Having a baby with Mike must have been tough at your age. How did you even manage to have a 5th child? Sarah wiggled and spoke in a sugary voice. Mike said our baby would be adorable and that he really wanted to see it. I take it all back. Mike shouted, his face contorted with rage. He glared at Sarah with hatred and hurled insults at her. I wasted 2 years on an old hag like you. I only consider women under 30. Sarah looked at Mike with eyes full of disbelief. That's awful, Mike. You said you'd love me even when I became a grandma. That was obviously a lie. When you get old, I'll move on to a younger woman. Old folks aren't my type. Mike stood up, glaring down at Sarah, his anger overflowing. You've got a husband and grown kids, and you're a plastic surgery beauty. I'll sue you for fraud. Sarah clicked her tongue at Mike's words and spoke in a deep, threatening voice, entirely different from before. You talk a big game when you think no one will talk back. Sarah stood up and faced Mike head-on. You're just a pompous guy flaunting your education, but I played along because you work for a good company. I thought I'd squeeze some money out of you after quitting as a hostess, just for pocket change. Sarah smirked and continued. Oh, and by the way, my husband is an Oxford graduate. With her chin raised, she delivered another blow to Mike. Just so you know, the youngest kid is my husband's. You foolishly paid child support, so I made out like a bandit. Mike, stunned, quickly turned red up to his ears. You've got to be kidding, I'm done with you. That's my line. An old man who doesn't know his place deserves to be left penniless by chasing after young women. Sarah spat out, her shoulders stiff, and stormed out of the room. I hurriedly followed her to the entrance and spoke in a stern tone. I'll be sending you a bill for damages. Do whatever you want. I'll just have your love-struck husband pay for it. When I returned to the room, Mike was tearing up the report, growling in frustration, even crying out of sheer anger and bitterness. Everyone's making a fool of me. Then he turned his furious gaze to me. So you want a divorce, right? Of course. You'll probably demand alimony, you cheapskate. A smirk spread across my face at Mike's irritation. Who's the cheapskate here? It's my rightful claim for both the cheating and the verbal abuse. Fine, but only after I get what's mine. What are you talking about? Mike smirked at my question. Dad's inheritance and the insurance money, it all goes to me, right? I better get those processes started. His confident tone made the relatives exchange glances and half smiles. Lisa and I couldn't hold back and started laughing out loud. Why are you laughing? Mike demanded, his anger rising. Wiping tears from my eyes, I told him, Mike, you're not getting a single penny. What? Your father left everything to me. I waved the will in front of the stunned Mike. He snatched it and looked at the document, his face turning into one of near tears. This can't be right. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake. The lawyer revealed it the night of the wake. We all agreed, of course. The relatives all nodded in unison. His judgment was sound. Who knows what a fool like you who skipped the funeral for a cheating trip would do with the money? He always said he was happy Dorothy kept him company. She even cared about his health. When he found out about your affair, he was torn about whether to tell Dorothy. He felt so guilty that leaving her the inheritance was the least he could do. Hearing the relative's words brought tears to my eyes. My father-in-law was worried about the affair. Mike, who had been silently listening, clenched his fists. He turned to me with fury in his eyes. You were sleeping with my dad, weren't you? What? I suspected it, seducing him with your looks. That's something a high school grad would do. Hey, Mike. Lisa tried to intervene, but he pushed her arm away, got close to my face, and raged furiously. You're divorcing me, right? Then renounce the inheritance. It's too much to take alimony from me and then also get the inheritance. You're my wife, so you should obey me, right? Just as I flinched at his shouting, a familiar voice from the corner of the room cut in. Enough of this. Huh, shut up and stay out of it. Mike momentarily faltered as my uncle stepped forward from among the relatives, but quickly regained his sneer. Oh, Dorothy's father figure, haven't seen you since the wedding. Let me tell you something while you're here. Mike's face twisted with dissatisfaction as he listed his complaints. I married her because she was supposed to be good at housework. But she's a worse cook than my mother, and she talks back all the time. She's useless. I put up with her for 10 years, but I don't need her anymore. After his haughty statement, he blinked. Have we met before? I sighed involuntarily. You're working on a joint project with my uncle's company, right? Didn't you check his name? After a moment of thinking, Mike turned pale and covered his mouth, letting out a small scream. I'm terribly sorry. I didn't realize you were the president of the company we're partnering with. That was just a joke. Please don't take it seriously. For someone so highly educated, don't you know the meaning of joke? Mike cringed at the sharp rebuke. My uncle gave him a cold, icy stare and spoke gravely. I've heard you're a capable team leader, but it seems your character is lacking. I'll report this incident to your superiors and have you removed from the project immediately. If not, the project is canceled. But my promotion to section chief depends on this. I don't care. You brought this on yourself. Dismissing Mike, my uncle then turned to me with a kind expression. You should have come to me sooner. It must have been tough for you. Yes. As Lisa gently patted my back, the tension within me eased, and tears started to fall. I glanced at Mike, who had collapsed on the floor, tearfully facing the relative's criticism. Mike had lied to me about his business trip, claiming it was a vacation to his company and taking paid leave. Unable to explain, ignoring the news of his father's death for a week to his company, and worried about the project. Mike rushed to work only to find that the team leader position had already been given to a rival employee. Excuse me, manager. Glared at fiercely, Mike began to tremble. You've angered the president of our partner company. Sorry, but keeping you at headquarters would damage our image. We're sending you to a regional office. Grateful he wasn't fired, Mike resignedly accepted the transfer. However, he caused trouble even at his new location and eventually resigned voluntarily. He survived on part-time jobs, but all his savings were used up for my alimony, and he was in debt from lavishing money on Sarah. He begged his relatives for money but was turned away and ended up living a reclusive life in a cheap apartment. He will undoubtedly lead a lonely and miserable old age. Sarah, who once bragged about being loved by her husband, was caught cheating when she received the certified letter I sent about the alimony. Her husband was furious. They divorced immediately. Her husband took the children, and Sarah was kicked out of their luxury apartment. With no savings to pay my alimony, her parents had to cover it, but then they disowned her. She now works day and night, repaying her parents while living alone in a rundown apartment. Since the divorce, freed from Mike's constant nagging, I've been living happily. Lisa and I still meet for coffee and go on trips, maintaining our close friendship. I've been doing well at work and was promoted to supervisor in the spring. On my days off, I enjoy reading mystery novels recommended by my late father-in-law. Sometimes I recall our conversations and shed a tear, wishing we had more time to talk. I kept half of the inheritance for my retirement and donated the other half to animal and children's charities. I thought that's what my father-in-law would have done. I will be in mourning for a while, but with the memories of my father-in-law in my heart, I want to move forward and face the future.